Hello and welcome. So this is a podcast style discussion. Um, I figured for the final project, it would be interesting to actually create a discussion as opposed to a scripted video or something, because I feel like that's kind of what this class is about. It's to get people to talk about inequalities, to get people to talk about their own personal experiences. And yes, there are statistical data, but every person has their own unique story, their own unique opinions, stuff like that. And obviously, you get to see a little bit about people's opinions in discussion posts. But I feel like in some sort of way, there is a bias to go towards one side and look at the actual like statistical evidence and just write about that as opposed to writing about your own opinion. So this is going to be a lot more opinion based. And I have a special guest with me today. Her name is Deirdre, and she's my girlfriend. Say hello.
Hello.
I figured that it would be interesting to have her come on and talk about it a little bit because she's from a little bit different of an area from me. Um, she's from more eastern New York, definitely more New York City than I am. I am from like the Finger Lakes, like out in the country, kind of. I mean, more suburban, but like definitely more of a country-esque area. Not necessarily um, big city suburban, more like country suburban, I suppose. And she's really close to New York City, has kind of a different experience. So um, today's topic is going to be on Module 4. So Module 4 for you, because since I think we've had a little bit of a talk about this before, just kind of just talking to each other, in general. It was on gender roles, gender inequality, stuff like that. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So today the topic is toxic masculinity. Um, so I'm going to ask you this first question, and it's very simple, and it's: is masculinity toxic? So, like, in your opinion, do you think that men being taught to be masculine makes them toxic? Do you think that it instills like a certain way that they need to be? Like, do you think that it inhibits violence, stuff like that?
I
Just
don't think it necessarily inhibits violence, but I think that instilling like core values like what you're saying
mm-hmm.
making them into a certain way, I feel like that doesn't just happen in masculinity though. I feel like that happens with both genders that from a young age you just instill these set ways in life even with children's toys
Mm-hmm.
guys got Hot Wheels and GI Joes, and then it's
Yeah,
for girls you get Polly Pockets and Littlest Pet Shop. But
yeah, for
there's
sure.
a distinction between the two of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
So
that's kind of a little bit about what we talked about in this module. So,
okay,
one of the discussions, like the actual PowerPoint. So there was like obviously readings, and then there was
yeah,
like the PowerPoint. So in the PowerPoint, it talks about the gendered like roles that are put into children's toys, stuff like that. So obviously children, even from like before they're being born,
yeah, you get
before they're
blue
born.
and pink,
So like
yeah,
when the baby gender is revealed, they're blue
blue for a
balloons or
boy
pink
or
balloons,
yeah,
stuff like that. Um, so this kind of topic, I mean, obviously we can stem into both sides. I'm perfectly fine with that. Whatever route this conversation goes in, it goes in that conversation. That's kind of the whole point of this, is
okay,
to create to create a discussion. To
all
talk
right,
about it. So it is primarily what I had in mind, more gendered. I'm going to put that in quotation marks towards masculinity. But obviously, as you're a female, if you want to talk about some more femininity, then that's perfectly fine. So, in your opinion, do you believe that there's a difference between gender and sex? That's the next question I got for you.
yeah. I feel like Well, one is where you are assigned a sex, like as
Mm-hmm.
classification for birth.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
So like
saying?
what's put on the birth certificate or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like that's used more for like classification for
Mm-hmm.
when they have to do like logs for
Yeah.
how many children were born, like all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to gender, I feel like gender is how you perceive yourself to be. Like if you genuinely believe yourself to be a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
like if you were born, let's say like if you were born a female but you believe that you are a male, then you should be able to like go ahead and pursue that,
Right. So
you
like for
know.
example, like transgenders.
Yeah.
Um, so what I have for the actual definitions of sex and gender is for sex, sex is biological, the biological aspect of being male or female,
Mm-hmm.
like you said. So, when you're born, they pretty much look at your genitalia, they write down male or female, and that's what you put down for any sort of form or
Yeah, like your
whatever, like
license,
government
yeah,
form, stuff like
paperwork.
that. Um, and obviously, like with modern society, with like in 2019, that's beginning to change. Obviously, now they have the other little other bubble for people who consider themselves. That's see that we're starting to now blend gender into sex, and obviously that's a whole other topic. I mean, it is the same kind of topic because gender roles are based off of kind of sex, but for gender, we have social or cultural aspects of being a man or woman. So
Yeah.
that's like what we were talking about, like what kind of toys you're supposed to like, how you're supposed to dress,
Okay.
all that kind of stuff. So gender is more of an expressive term for what kind of sex you are, and then sex is just like you're pretty much getting down to your chromosomes.
Yeah.
So what you're
Okay.
born as. Um, when do you think that gender roles are actually first like ingrained into a child? So like what age would you say do you think? Obviously we talked about even before like before then, but when do you think that, say for example, masculinity? When do you think that children are first taught to be masculine, to be manly, stuff like that?
See, like for me, growing up with like my brother and my dad,
Mm-hmm.
like my dad always pushed for Michael to do like sports and stuff since like kindergarten, like
Mm-hmm.
but like, that's just kind of how I grew up. And even in like kindergarten, I remember they would like go around and they'd ask everybody what they'd want to be when they grew up,
Yeah.
right? And all the boys would be like, I want to be a firefighter, or I want to be like a police officer or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I feel like it gets ingrained into children before they even know what gender roles are, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I actually, when I was a kid, I actually wanted to be a garbage man. That I don't know why I wanted to be
They
a
make good
garbage man.
money though.
They do make good money. I will admit that. But yeah, I don't know. It was either that or a chef at Denny's because I love Denny's so much. Oh, I always wanted to be that guy that would like put the little smiley
Smiley face on
faces
the
on the pancakes for
pancakes.
kids. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I feel like gender roles, so it has it written down like in the textbook or whatever. It says 6 and under is
Hmm.
when gender roles are like first really like kind of asserted. So I would say for me, like personally for me, I would say a different kind of upbringing from most people,
Yeah.
because I didn't have a father growing up, so it was just my mom. And so like with that, and also with the fact that she was a single mother raising me on her own, we didn't really have much money for toys and stuff. Like obviously, like every once in a while for Christmas or whatever, she'd probably save up some money. I remember when I was younger, I had a PlayStation. That was like the first real, I think, more, I want to say more masculine toy, because video games are originally were kind of seen as more of a masculine thing. Obviously now girls are getting into it a lot more. I feel like there is still kind of a gap when it comes to that. I feel like
It's a more men to woman ratio.
there's still more of a male interest than female. Obviously, with like Twitch and stuff like that, you're seeing
Male
more,
streamers and stuff like that.
actually more women streamers. But that's a small demographic. Um, but yeah, I didn't really have like action figures or anything like that. I had probably like Legos. Legos weren't really gendered. Like I mean, they can be gendered.
They I think it's more oriented towards guys,
Yeah, in
but
some aspects,
they
yeah,
do some like
yeah.
feminine Lego products,
I
you
think
know.
I think some of the more like recent toys, like similar to, um, like what are they, the Roblox toys or whatever. You know what I'm talking about, right? The build them toys that they're kind of like Roblox, but I don't know. But I've seen a lot more of those with female building things. But anyways, um, toys are one thing, but in talking about toxic masculinity, right? So obviously there are some things that I feel like when you're really really young that will affect you, if and I think that if you're really young and you see your father or whatever being really aggressive or something like that, you're going to probably grow up and also want to
Have
be
aggression.
aggressive and stuff like that. So I feel like in some ways, you know, obviously apart from just toys, there are some things that can really affect
Yeah.
your view of what it means to be masculine. So I wouldn't say that it's untrue that 6 and under is really, you know, the youngest age for that kind of stuff. But anyways, moving on. Um, we can probably skip this question. Do you think that if gender roles were not assigned early on, that masculinity and femininity wouldn't be much of an issue? Um, it's kind of a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
I kind of put that in there, but we don't really need to answer that one.
Right.
Do you believe that men are taught to hide their emotions? If so, have you had an experience with it?
I mean, I don't think that they're taught to hide their emotions, but I feel like they do because they don't want to be seen as weak.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. Yeah, that's
I don't think that they're taught to necessarily hide them, but I feel like they hide them so they can reserve their emotions and not be judged
mm-hmm.
for being emotional.
Do you think that that comes from maybe what they've experienced, not necessarily like being taught by like a parent, but maybe like
In school.
in school or
Yeah.
like watching movies or something like that? Do you think that maybe that would have an effect on why men maybe are see it as like a weakness to?
I feel like maybe it's definitely a little bit more prominent in schools,
Mm-hmm.
but I can see why you posed that argument,
Yeah.
you know. I think it definitely has a lot to do with like other kids their age, like when you're growing up, like influencing you to
Yeah.
either be emotionful, like emotionless or emotional, you know.
Yeah, personally, I can say that I have had some experiences where, like, if I was crying or whatever, like if I was, expressing my way, my feelings like emotionally, yeah, that I think I did have some bullies that would kind of use that a little bit to kind of get at me. And I feel like that does kind of it is a kind of a bigger issue for men than it is for women. Obviously, women I feel like are a lot easy. They definitely talk about their emotions a lot more. They're a little bit more open about it. And I feel like that is part of toxic masculinity is hiding those emotions because we'll get into it a little bit later, but I feel like that is a big reason why a lot of this violence and stuff like that does come out because one of the biggest um, effects of like emotional issues or like mental illness is keeping it inside and letting it kind of like bubble up and bubble up and
Yeah,
bubble
I
up
mean,
and
I
then
do the
like
same thing.
yeah, I think we all do in some ways, but I think that and obviously this can be just opinion based, but I do believe that men do it a lot more depending obviously in the situation. I feel like depending on like your area, your experiences, stuff like that, maybe some men have more, outlets to get it out, more people, more therapy, or more stuff like that. And I think that it does have to do with where you grew up, what kind of societies you have. But yeah, anyways, next question. How do you think something like a father being violent and or attacking someone in or outside the family might affect a child's masculinity?
That's a hard question for me to answer.
No, you can answer completely honestly, and I I know you don't want it to come out, but like it's okay. We all have our own personal experiences, personal stories. If you'd like to talk about some experiences you may have had with that, that's fine. If not, then we can move on. If you're uncomfortable with the question, like any of these questions, you can just say we'll pass on that question and we can move on with it. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. However,
I'm gonna pass on that question.
okay, that's fine. I want you to be comfortable. Obviously, with talking about this is the whole
Yeah.
point of discussing it. I will state my opinion though. I personally believe that, especially in men, guys like boys, if they see their father, there's this kind of stigma, and it was written in the textbook like boy hits or father hits dog. Um, then wait no, sorry, father hits boy, boy hits dog. So like that pretty much just means that like when you're young and impressionable, if you see something like that, you're prone to repeat it
Yeah.
because you don't have any other really way of expressing stuff at that point apart from just relaying what you're seeing. So I feel like there is a kind of connection between, households of maybe abuse or something like that and having teenagers or adolescents who may be more violent or more like dominant based masculine. Um, but we will move on to the next question. That's just my opinion. Um, do you believe that toxic masculinity is one of the main causes of violence, as men are more likely to engage in violent acts?
Mm.
Do you need a Do you need me to explain the question a bit?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It's a convoluted question. So kind of part of what we talked about is that violence, especially stuff like fighting in schools, whatever, kind of might tie back with the lack of being able to talk about emotions, and it's kind of, for men anyways, used as a masculine way of creating dominance, creating, um, pretty much solving issues. So like say two guys, maybe they're both interested in the same girl, right?
Oh, yeah, we've
Yeah.
had stuff like this happen at my school, and
Yeah.
they've, like, people have planned fights outside of
Yeah.
school.
So
Of, like,
do you believe that that comes from masculinity that's kind of instilled in people, and do you think that it makes, this kind of toxic masculinity?
I mean, I guess so.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't really know what else to say.
That's fine.
All
We can
right.
yeah. We can move on to the next question. Yeah, I do personally think that there is some form of,
I mean, like in my school, like people would just fight each other. Like guys would fight each other for like no reason. Like,
yeah.
I almost got hit in the face one time because these two guys bumped into each other, and the one guy just hit him in the face.
Yeah, that's stuff. Okay, that's stuff that I actually didn't experience very often. I feel like there is a lot more at play with this kind of specific topic apart from just masculinity and like gender roles. I mean, what we've had to read for the class has pretty much said that a lot of it has to do with masculinity and stuff like that. But I feel like it also has to do with the area, how you were raised, a bunch of other things. Because, if it was just masculinity, it would be in all schools, every school that has a guy. You know, it wouldn't just be in, I don't know, like lower class, maybe African American schools or whatever. It wouldn't just be in a certain area of schools because our school we didn't we I think I experienced maybe one fight, and
We would have like 5 a day.
it was very short lived because as soon as it broke out, the principal
Principals
came in
came, yeah.
and stopped it immediately. So I feel like there's kind of an enablement, you know? You see it happen and then you're prone to do the same thing, right? Because you're seeing that these two people are fighting to solve an issue, and you're like, maybe this could solve my issue with this other person. So maybe you're prone to go fight that other person because you see that it could possibly solve your issue as opposed to just talking it out or whatever, you know. Anyways, what is your definition of violence or why people engage in violence? So what I mean by that is like, how would you define violence, I suppose?
I guess I would describe violence as like actions and or words
Mm-hmm.
against another person
Mm-hmm.
with the intention of hurting them.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
And I think what drives people to engage in violence could be a number of different factors. I feel like it could be jealousy, or
Mm-hmm.
you have a grudge against the person for some minor thing that happened years ago, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
or just you're a sociopath. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there is that, and this is one thing that is one thing that wasn't actually talked about all that much. Like obviously there is a lot of violence in our society, and it's sad to say that there is, but there is, and as of right now, we're not really doing too much about it. But there are some
Instances.
instances, yes, I thank you, where it is completely just like genetic, where it's just like
You are born that
you're
way.
born a psychopath, and then maybe on top of that you were raised in a really terrible like household.
Yeah, because if you were born that way and you're raised in certain conditions that could make you snap.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that also has something to do with it. So yeah, I digress.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and then there's the next question: do you believe that violence is genetic?
I think it could be, yes.
In yeah, like I
In the
said,
instances if you're a psychopath or a sociopath.
hmm I believe in some like very few instances there is that genetic aspect to it where, you know, you have that mental illness and then it causes you to be more of a violent or be more
Exactly.
violent tendencies. I do think that there is a lot of violence out there that is not genetic and it is
Oh,
social.
as do I, but
And yeah.
I think that some forms of violence are genetic.
Hmm.
Next question, please.
Yeah. Okay. How do you think that media, for example, violent movies or video games, stuff like that, affects violence in society, especially in masculinity? So, for
I
example,
mean, I guess like in games directed more towards men, such as Grand Theft Auto, like there is a lot of violence in that game. Like you rob people, you just shoot them down in the middle of the street.
mm,
You like hijack helicopters
what do
and
what do you mean that's gendered more towards men? There's an they can choose to have male or female characters in the online. I'm just kidding. Obviously, it is a little bit more gendered towards
yeah,
men, but um,
but like you see that, and I don't really want to link the two together, but like
yeah.
you see a lot of men shoot up schools. I
Hmm.
haven't seen like a single woman that's shot up a school in the like United States.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I feel like in a way, like I guess this kind of goes back to the genetic thing. Like if your brain is wired a certain way, and like violence, if it releases endorphins in your brain, like playing those video games and like
Hmm.
hurting, well, like simulated people in that case, but like it might
Right.
encourage someone to go out and,
Hmm.
in a sense, like actually commit violent crimes. I know like not everyone does that. I play Grand Theft Auto 2. I haven't shot up a school.
Right,
I
right.
don't plan on ever doing such a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like in some instances, yes, it does
Yeah.
in a way correlate to that.
And this is a big I don't think I wouldn't even say issue. It's just a big topic that's been discussed a lot, especially on the news and stuff like that. You remember, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you remember, but when like Halo 3 for example came out, there was a lot of news coverage about how it was creating violence in teenagers and stuff like that. And obviously
It
since it's
just honestly depends on who's playing the game.
yeah, I feel like a lot of people buy into that and then they don't really like try to understand it. Um, and for me anyways, like obviously I play quite a lot of violent video games. I play like Call of Duty, stuff like that, all those, masculine video games. But
Air quotation
yeah,
marks.
air quotation marks there. But I've never even once had a thought of hurting anyone. I've never even wanted to have a fight. I'm a very pacifist type of person, and I don't want to say that the video games have solved that and created a passive like person out of me, but I do believe that in some instances having those violent video games creates a means to take out maybe possibly that violent
Yeah, like I was
desire
saying.
and get it out in a more healthier means than going and fighting someone
In the streets, yeah.
or shooting up a school or
Yeah.
something. I feel like there is a small sliver of people who will play video games and then they'll see what happens. And there are some news coverages of this, like, for example, I mean, obviously this isn't really correlated, but Slender the game, there was those two girls or whatever that they dragged a girl out into the woods and they killed her for Slender Man. And
That's
like
so weird.
they, no, I'm serious. It was an actual news story. Because of the creepy pastas in the game, they I mean they were very young. They were like 12 years old, so I don't think they even really knew what they were doing. But they actually took a girl out into the
I just
woods
feel
and killed
like
her.
you know what you're doing when
Yeah,
you're doing something like that, but that's besides the point.
right. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, some kids maybe I don't know where their background came from. I don't know. Maybe they were in a violent household or something. I don't know the whole story behind it, but I do feel like there is a very sliver of amount of people who might play those violent video games or watch those violent movies and take it as reality, and then just assume that that is how it is. So if they go out and I don't know, maybe rob a car, like steal a car or something, that there won't be any sort of you know kickback from society, that they won't get in trouble for it. And that's I don't think that getting rid of violent movies or video games is going to solve it. Obviously,
Yeah.
I think that it's a greater issue, and I think that there is some sort of masculine kind of thing behind it, because the statistics do show that there is. I think it was. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was around 92% of violent crime is men, something like that. Obviously, most cases of domestic abuse are from men. Most instances of rape are from men. There's very slim amount of cases. I mean, there are some cases with women, obviously, but it's mostly men that do this stuff. And I feel like a lot of it has to do with there is some of it, at least some of it has to do with masculinity. So going into violence a little bit more, there is in the book it discussed there is a trinity of violence. So like men's violence is in like three different categories. So there's violence against self, violence against other women, and then violence against other men. So we're going to break up each of those categories and kind of talk about them a little bit because they're each kind of important to talk about in terms of masculinity and stuff like that. I feel like since there is a more male dominated like violent tendency, I think that it's important to discuss these individual topics, um, kind of get to the root of why men are more violent and if it has anything to do with masculinity. So we'll start off with violence against self. So I'm just going to ask, what do you think that this means? So what do you, when you hear violence against self in terms of men or whatever, what do you think that it means?
Violence against self could be like emotionally beating yourself up over something or
Mm-hmm.
I guess in a way physically harming yourself by like punching holes in walls because like you're
If your name's Kyle, yeah.
I'm dead. Now you're the one who's stereotyping this into masculinity.
Oh, for those of you who won't get that joke, it's a meme. But anyways, you were saying?
I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you with a joke.
It's okay.
um, yeah. So I would agree. Violence against self pretty much just means, you know, any sort of like negativity that you kick back at yourself, whether it can be in terms of harm, self harm, suicidal thoughts, stuff like that. And yeah, so I obviously this is an issue for both men and women.
Yeah.
It's really just violence against self, as I would say, and part of the reason why I'm talking about this one first is because I feel like it's probably going to be the fastest topic to talk about, because it's not really, it doesn't really have that much to do with gender. I don't want to say, because it has a lot more to do with mental illness. It has a lot more to do with
Yeah.
insecurity, stuff like that. Um, but do you think that men are actually violent against themselves because of their insecurities, or women, men or women?
I feel like that one's debatable. I feel
Mm.
like it could go either way. I feel like you could be violent against yourself because you're insecure about something, or you could be violent against yourself because you're enduring something like you said earlier about like emotionally stuffing things until like you just kind of snap. It could be one of those things too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it could be a plethora of different things that leads to violence against the self.
Yeah. So one of the topics that was kind of discussed is, like, for example, in relationships, when it comes to feeling kind of threatened by someone of the same gender. So for example, like, to a heterosexual couple, maybe a man feels a little bit threatened if his significant other hangs out with other guys, or same with the girl. So for example, in a relationship, specifically talking heterosexual here, obviously, like, homosexual and stuff like that is slightly different because it is the same gender. Um, do you think that men are more likely to be threatened by their significant other hanging out with people of the opposite sex than women, or less?
I don't know because considering my previous relationships, my ex-boyfriends didn't really get mad,
Mm-hmm.
but I know you get a little bit jealous sometimes. So like
Yeah, yeah. In my experience, I will say that I am a little bit threatened by other guys, and it's something that I'm not really that embarrassed about. I guess I am embarrassed about it because there's really no need to be, but like, when you beat yourself up so much, or if you're insecure, it tends to come out a lot more than, like, say, for
yeah.
example, someone who's got no, mental illness has to do with it, and other things have to do with it.
I want to say something else too, in regards to like the when you said it, like men being more threatened or women. Um,
Mm,
I feel like it depends. Like for the women aspect of it, right? I feel like it depends on the circumstance. Like for me, like it depends on like the relationship and like who I'm with and like how their actions are towards the certain person.
mm,
Like I don't know. Like I got really mad when you were hanging out with your ex-girlfriend, but I had an intuition that she was up to no good and I was ready, so
that's fair. I will give you that one. Um, yeah, I feel like it might be personal. Obviously, it's very personal. You know, every person has their own reasons for feeling insecure, or maybe being threatened by other people when it comes to relationships and stuff like that. Personally, I will say for myself,
you're
I
trying to defend yourself here.
not even necessarily defending myself. I'm just saying, like, in terms of, I'm talking in terms of masculinity here. Like, part of the reason why I myself am a little insecure about it is because I'm a really skinny dude. I am not. I know you're gonna laugh at that, but it's an actual thing that I, like, think about. Like, I'm a really skinny dude. I'm really tall and lanky. Um, I feel like I'm only attractive to a certain type of, not necessarily a certain type of person.
Wow.
No, 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 no. Okay, let me rephrase that. Not even a certain type of people.
I hate you.
No, you don't. Uh, okay, okay, not a certain type of people, but like, you know what I mean.
No, I don't know what you mean.
This podcast is getting really personal all of a sudden. But like, in terms of masculinity, there is this like stereotype that in order to be a man or whatever, you have to be big and buff and bulky and that.
Not necessarily.
No, there is that, like, for women, right? For example, on the women's side of things, do you feel like you have some sort of, you know, what's the word for it? Like, desire to be this billboard model, you know, makeup, beautiful, perfect body type person in order to be beautiful? Like, do you believe that you have to be that? I suppose.
Um,
You know that I don't think you have to be that, obviously, but like in your own head, you know, do you feel like
I mean, I feel like I have standards for myself as to how I would like to be, but it's not like I don't like look at somebody else and I'm like, hey, why don't I look like that? Like,
yeah,
because everybody's different,
right.
you know.
I feel like there are a lot of people out there who do look at that kind of stuff. They'll look at magazines with perfect people and they'll see them and be like, Jesus, they're really hot. I wish that I looked like that. And then they'll have to, they work so hard to get themselves to look like that just so that they are not insecure about themselves. I'm a little bit guilty of it myself. Like I'll see this really buff guy, like for example on our campus, the one guy walks around without a shirt on. What's his name? I forget.
Ryan.
Not Ryan. Um, where's the pink shorts? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
He's super buff guy. Obviously he's kind of a douchebag, but like
Just drop that in your
I
podcast.
I'm gonna put it out there. He's kind of a he's kind of a douche, but 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 he's got
Edit
these.
this part out.
But no, I'm not even gonna edit this part out because it's it's a conversation, general conversation. Um, he's got I will say he's got a nice body, and I wish that I could have that body sometimes. Like that's, and I feel like
Do you want that body or do you want that body?
I want that body, you know. But yeah, I do feel like there
We're
is
getting way too off topic
a little
right
bit,
now.
but anyways, bringing it back, I do feel like there is some even if it's minor in some people, obviously in some people it's more, there is a desire to be this buff person in order to be masculine, in order to be manly or whatever. And it could be a bunch of different things, media or whatever, reading newspapers, looking at billboards, whatever. um so we're gonna go completely 180 here because we're still talking about violence against self and talk about some suicide rates for a little bit. Really just depressing topic, I know, but it's an issue, right? So in terms of suicide rates and statistics, who do you think has a higher rate of suicide, men or women?
Well, I guess since you're talking about masculinity, it's gonna be men.
Yeah, it is men. I mean, yes, you got me off guard there a little bit, but do you think that this has to do with masculinity, femininity, and gender roles, or something else? So,
I think I kind of answered this question.
did you?
I mean, yes. I think it has something to do with masculinity. I think it has something to do with hiding your emotions. I think it has something to do with like the set
Mm,
ways that people instruct guys to be like, you know.
yeah. So, in terms of actual suicide rates, men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than women. So for example, I think I forgot to write it down on the actual sheet here, I think. But I think it was people 45 to 50. For every 100,000 people, 10 women commit suicide as compared to every man's 30. So it's kind of it's a little shocking to see that as a man who has depression and anxiety and thinks about that kind of stuff a little bit, to see that difference. Um, and so while we're on the topic of violence against self with that, there's some I was reading into this because it was actually very interesting to see this. Who do you think actually uses a more violent medium
Women.
for this? Women, really?
Yeah.
So what would you consider a violent medium for like suicide?
I feel like men are more common to shoot themselves,
Mm.
but I feel like women are more likely to like.
Cut the wrist or whatever.
Or like down pills.
Yeah. See,
I mean, any
violence.
form of suicide is violent. Don't get me wrong, but like I
Well,
feel like
yes, obviously with the intention of fatality, but
yeah,
violence in terms of brutality, I'm more is more so what I'm talking about. So like violence with weaponry, knives included. Um, men. So about 50% of men commit suicide with a gun, and only
uh,
30% of women commit suicide with a gun.
I
Um,
could see that. Yeah.
yeah. And so women are more prone to actually use poison. So poison is 30% of women, whereas opposed to around 15% of men. And then I think it goes pills, cutting, and then other things, probably like hanging or whatever. Very, very slim. But in terms of actual violence, I would say that a gun is a lot more of a violent means to kill yourself than downing some like arsenic. You know what I mean? So, which is actually kind of interesting. Men are more prone to go out if they're suicidal, buy a gun, and then shoot themselves in the head than a woman. And do you think that that has anything to do with gender roles? Do you think that that has to do with masculinity or whatever? Um,
I
or
mean, again, like saying what I said for the previous question, I think that it does
mm,
in some ways.
yeah, Uh, I think that obviously men are going to be more prone to be more interested in guns and stuff because that's kind of how we're
You
raised.
instill, um, like the
Mm-hmm.
you like growing up, like you have those things instilled in your heads, like
Mm-hmm.
cars, like Hot Wheels or GI Joes with the little guns on them,
Or
like
Nerf guns, yeah,
Nerf
stuff
guns,
like that,
like
BB guns, stuff like that.
mm-hmm.
And then growing up into the teenage years, you have violent movies like war movies and video games like Call of Duty. So yeah, there is definitely I think a higher desire for men to own guns. Period. In general, not only for just talking about suicide. Obviously, I'm sorry for the depressing kind of topic, but like it does kind of relate. But like even just like in terms of the household, right? In terms of like a family household, the gun is more likely to be under the man's possession than a woman's. A man is going to be more prone to go out and buy a gun to protect their family as opposed to a woman. A woman might go out and, for example, like buy more locks or for in your example, buy like one of those like ding dong things that open when you open the
They
door.
also
Or
have the giant lock underneath the door too.
mm-hmm. So I think that in terms of guns, it's very interesting to see, even in just suicide rates, that men are more prone to use a gun to kill themselves than a woman, and I think that it also has a lot to do with just masculinity in general, and that men are more interested in guns, partially because of how we're raised, partially because of how we're what we're exposed to, than women, and why that is simply just because of this toxic. I'm going to put this in quotation marks because obviously we haven't even really kind of gotten into the whole like toxic masculinity, because toxic masculinity is um, it's kind of I want to say that it's used more on the female side, to be honest, like feminists, right? Feminists, they'll go to use the words like patriarchy or toxic masculinity, stuff like that.
I feel like feminism this is where we're gonna get off topic though.
Mm-hmm.
Feminism is vouching for equality of the sexes, where you're talking about like extreme feminists.
No, I'm not even
Like,
talking about that. I'm talking about like so patriarchy. The definition of
it's like
patriarchy.
lineages from your father, or like
Mm-hmm.
a male dominated society.
Yeah, male dominated society. So women
Yeah.
are fighting to have a more equally dominated society,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't really feminazi at all. It's pretty important, I think. And I think that there are some feminists who will just claim that all men are toxic, but I think that more so legit feminists are just trying to get rid of some of the toxic masculinity and create a more equal society. So that way there isn't this stigma that, you know, men have to be the dominant role, men have to like hide their emotions and stuff like that. We all want to be equal, obviously. We all want to have equal opportunities, equal rights, and I firmly do believe that in order to have that equal society, you have to get rid of some of this toxic masculinity. You got to get rid of some of this violence. You got to get rid of some of this other stuff. So I wasn't even trying to jab at the like feminazi thing, because obviously that's a whole other topic for a whole other thing. There are some pretty crazy feminists out there if you look up on YouTube, but like, yeah. um Anyways, so let's go on to violence against women. um Now this is probably um I don't want to say a more depressing topic, but because we just talked
Suicide is
about
pretty
suicide. That's
depressing
pretty
too.
depressing. But like, so the two most notable forms of violence against women are like domestic abuse
Mm-hmm.
and rape or sexual
Yeah.
assault. So I only have like three questions for this because I don't want to get into this kind of topic too much, just because I don't know if anyone out there has had to deal with this or whatever. So trigger warning for this this topic. If you have dealt with it, just skip past it. I see you flipping me off, but I'm not even talking about you. Um, do you think these have any correlation to each other as to why they happen? So, like, do you think that domestic abuse and rape have any common grounds as to why they occur?
Depending on the situation, yes.
Mm. That's fair. That's fair. See, because I'm thinking part of the reason why these events occur is it's all kind of a dominance thing. So the reason
Yeah,
why
that's what I was thinking,
the
but I
reason
didn't really want to say it.
no, it's fine. It's fine. Say whatever's on your mind. Domestic abuse and rape are both a dominance thing. So it occurs a lot with people who are insecure about their dominance. They're insecure about, I suppose, being masculine, being a man. So in order to counter that, in order to, I guess, to themselves prove that they are in fact manly, they will go to great lengths to prove that they're the dominant person. So they'll do these horrible things, um, just to simply prove to themselves. And I feel like this is actually one of the bigger issues when it comes to toxic masculinity, because, yeah, um, we can just skip past this if you want to.
No, that's fine. That's not
Okay. So why do you? Honestly, the next two questions kind of just tie back to the same one. They're both just why do you think X happens? So going into each one individually. Like I said, both of them are kind of just um, a dominance thing, or mental illness. Mental illness could be a reason for it too. Um, there is kind of there's a few different reasons why someone might engage in these things. Obviously, it's horrible. It's terrible. And I hope that no one will ever have to deal with this kind of stuff. But it is kind of important to talk about in order to create an issue, to create a solution. Um, so moving on, violence against other men. So Where do you think that violence against other men stems from?
Maybe like jealousy,
Yeah, that could be something, yeah.
or maybe rivalry.
Yeah. So, you know, when I'm talking about violence against other men, we're kind of breaking off from,
Hatred, like
yeah,
maybe.
yeah. We're gonna kind of break off from just like high school stuff, like high school fights, and talk about violence against other men in terms of, you know, wars, stuff like that. So, um, can you list off as many cases of like violence against other men you can think of? It can be anything. So like war. Um, Obviously, we don't want to sit here and just like we can go over millions of different kinds of different wars that have occurred, but just a specific topic like war, shootings, stuff like that.
Um,
Nothing.
I don't know. I mean, one time I was like in this place, in this restaurant where around where I live, and this guy just literally walked in to the restaurant and stabbed the guy that was waiting online. So
Yeah, that's crazy.
I I don't necessarily know where I don't know where that stemmed from.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
just like, so
Yeah.
I think it could stem from numerous things. Like I said, like jealousy, hatred, like rivalry.
Mm,
I feel like it could be a random act of violence too,
yeah.
just as a way of getting your anger out.
Hmm.
So
It's a very
I just,
complex
yeah, I had
issue.
to think about that.
Yeah, it's very complex. There's a lot of minimal things that might add up to that might create something like that where a guy walks into a restaurant and just stabs someone. Like that's I can't really say that I can think of his motive to do that. I really can't. But I feel like there's a lot of things in
Welcome
play.
to
Is
Southern New York.
Yeah, I want to go back. No, just kidding. I can't really think of his motive as to why he would want to do that. But I feel like mental illness, maybe possible previous cases of parental abuse, or maybe he grew up in an area that was more prone to violence or something like that. It could be media. It could be maybe he just lost his job. I don't know. It could be any amount of things. Um,
Maybe it could be any sort of trigger, but like when somebody snaps, they're gonna snap.
yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Yep. Do you believe that fighting solves issues? And discuss your point of view.
I feel like sometimes it might. Like I feel like emotionally fighting can solve issues, or like maybe
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know about, but like I've seen two guys from my high school like beat each other up over the same girl, and then afterwards be like, "Okay, we good, bro," and then just like shake hands and walk away. So like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in some cases
I
it's just like
over stupid things, but like I feel
yeah.
like in a lot of cases, I feel like no, fighting does not solve all issues.
Mm.
You know what I
So
mean?
yeah, for like example wars. Like, do you think that in specifically wars, do you believe that fighting and killing other people in other countries is going to just solve the issues between countries, or
I feel like even if there is no physical war, there is still tension.
yeah.
Like for example, like the Cold War, like there's like no actual war was being fought during that, maybe except like Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
but like for like a majority of that time, because that went on until 1991.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't, for some instances in time throughout that period, there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a physical war going on.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I.
So like I feel like tensions could still be there, like
Mm-hmm.
because that period is called like the Cold War era, even though like action wasn't
Right.
really occurring. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for example, I think it's important to bring up World War One and World War Two in
Yeah.
this because World War One, obviously, you would think that that would have been it, right? There wouldn't have had to been a second one, but then cases after the war led to the pretty much Germany getting pissed off that we treated them so poorly after the war, and left their country in poverty, and like pretty much made them pay for all the war reparations and all that
Then it
stuff.
was also like with the stock market crash of 1929. A lot of
Mm,
Americans had money invested in Germany and withdrew it,
yeah,
and so it didn't just affect Americans, but it affected Germany, and Germany was kind of like, what the heck,
yeah.
like you know.
And like now we're facing, and obviously this is kind of going a little bit off topic, but we're almost facing an issue with Trump going to possibly go to war with like Iran now, because recently they like flew a drone over or something, like they shot down a
I'm
drone.
aware.
Yeah,
I
so
thought he called that off though, but
I don't even know, but so we've obviously already been to war with Middle East in Iraq war. um and I feel like even after, yes, maybe in terms of politically, you might, the dictator or the president might shake hands, right, and be like, okay, the war's over, let's agree to just stop all this shit and move on. um but really, it doesn't, you can't really move on from that. You can't really move past it. Hundreds, thousands, millions of people die at the end of the day, and what does it really solve? So like, does fighting, does violence solve issues? I don't think so. I never saw it really, in my opinion, as a decent way to solve an issue. And yeah, in the case of maybe like two teenagers who don't really know how to express themselves, fighting over a
but
girl, it's different. But
in some cases, I do see how fighting could be used to resolve an issue, like for example, the Civil War.
yeah,
You know, but
yeah,
I feel like that's a little bit off topic.
yeah.
So
Well, I mean, the violence does have to do with masculinity, and there is a lot of men that are involved in that stuff.
hmm
So, wars. Previously, many of the people who created and perpetrated those wars were men, purely basing it off of almost rage and just anger, stuff like that. So, I don't think it's completely unrelated. I think that it is a different topic, maybe for a different day. Um, but yeah. Do you think that physical or gun related violence has to do with area, culture, media, or any of these things?
could you repeat the question?
Do you think that physical or gun related violence has to do with area, culture, media, or any of these things?
I feel like it has something to do with your area and the people who you grew up with,
Mm.
but
Your influencers.
yeah, I think media has a little bit to do with it too, because you grow up and you ever notice how like they only have like one happy news story
Yeah,
from like the whole hour long special of the news.
yeah,
It's only like one happy story, and the rest of it are more violent actions. So I feel like yes, in a way it does.
yeah. I think that specifically in terms of media, like media can be really anything. It can be like simply just watching a violent movie or whatever. But in terms of the news, I feel like there is kind of a lot of um, perpetual, creating this perpetual violence going on, because obviously I was barely even like alive at this point. But like for example, when Columbine first happened, it was put on the news, which was kind of controversial because it was like one of the first of instances of a violent act at a school like that. And since then, there's been school shootings almost every year, which I feel like is part to do with the media coverage. And these shooters, um, maybe they are insecure because, and a lot of them when they were interviewed, right, they said that part of the reason why they did it was because everyone hated them, they were bullied a lot, and they just wanted to get back at the people who treated them so terribly, right? I feel like it also has to do with the fact that they want some form of glorification from it. They want some form of attention, and the media is giving them this outlet to do it, right? So when they do this shooting, obviously the media is going to be all over it, posting it everywhere, and all of a sudden this kid that was, like a nobody in school, was bullied a lot, was, very insecure, felt like he had maybe no masculinity or manliness, is all of a sudden on every single person's TV screen across the country. And I feel like it does perpetuate some issues. Um, in terms of culture, I feel like there is kind of a tendency for more impoverished areas to maybe engage in more violent tendencies and stuff like that. I don't want to say that it's necessarily racial. I mean, I feel like there is some racial stuff behind it. Maybe it's more so to do with the racial topic or the first module that we were talking about than this topic, masculinity. I mean, it might partially do with it, but have to do with it. But yeah, I don't know. So we're gonna kind of go. We're gonna be closing this up in a little bit here, but I have one little last section to talk about, and it is homophobia. So um, one of the defining things as to how you're supposed to be a man, right? And obviously, this is changing a lot because it is 2019 and now gay marriage is legal. It is pretty much almost accepted. There are still fucking some people out there who I know I just sweared, but it just annoys me, right? There are some people out there who are still adamant to hate on these people for whatever reason. But in especially earlier times, it was seen as unmanly or, um, unmasculine to engage in any form of homosexual activity. Or, so if you had any homosexual tendencies or anything like that, often when you were younger and like earlier times, they would wean that out of you in order to create a man. And this is kind of talked about in one of the documentaries we had to watch, where they would use terms like, guys when they're bickering with each other or just joking around will be like, "You're gay," or say stuff like that. And it's to create this manliness in them and to try to wean that stuff out of it, wean you out of being a pussy or wean you out of being a bitch or being gay or whatever. Um, and obviously, like, as even though gay marriage and all that is legal, people do still use gay as a bad thing. They will still be like, "You're gay," say stuff like that. And so, do you believe that homosexuals experience unacceptance because of of this masculinity or toxic masculinity? Obviously, there are some instances where it's religious or whatever, but do you think that masculinity in this kind of the topic that we're talking about has anything to do with why homosexuals might be unaccepted in our society?
No,
No?
I don't.
So, what do you believe that it is then? Religious? Religion?
I feel like some people just have ways that they think the world should be,
Mm-hmm.
and they see two people of the same gender together in love, and they think that that's not the purpose that they were intended to be here for.
Right.
You know, I
Yeah.
feel like that has a lot of it to do with it, and yes, I think it also has to do with religion and all that other
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But I feel like it has a lot to do with like differing ideologies of different people.
Yeah. Well, let me. Obviously, this isn't a question that I really wrote down here, but let me just kind of like paint you an example for a second here. Say, uh, you're out with the guys or something, and you are in public, sitting on a bench, and across the walkway, you see a man on man gay couple making out, as opposed to a female female gay couple making out. Do you think that your male friends are going to be more likely to be like, "Ooh, look at that female on female couple making out," and be like, "Ew, those gay guys should stop making out"?
I feel like it depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. I feel that's true. Yeah. I feel like there is kind of a little bit of a stigma for that, though.
Yeah, but I feel like it changes from person to person.
That's fair. I'll give you that one. Um, how do you think those of homosexual orientation are affected by masculinity and gender roles?
I think that if you're a homosexual man, right,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like some people might not be accepting of it. Like, let's say you're a homosexual man to two very religious parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're the only child.
Yeah.
I feel like they could be like, how could you do this to us? Like, you have to carry on the family name, which is like a masculine
Yeah.
thing, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you have a son, and you're like, okay, so our lineage can continue. And I think that when, for some people, when they find out that their son or daughter is gay or lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of like, for them, it might crush that dream of theirs
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
Because, like, yes, there is, like, you could have somebody carry a baby for you with, like, one of your, like, sperm, like, one of the couple's sperm, but, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like them having a child, so I feel like
Yeah.
for some parents that's an issue.
Yeah. Um, I think that I'm gonna go kind of a little bit on a different way here. Obviously, it's not just gay people,
Yeah.
but I feel like there is a section of people who express themselves in a more um, a different way apart from their own gender role. So, say for example, like a guy enjoys putting on makeup every day. Like I'll give you an example, like James Charles or something, right? Where he like puts on makeup every day, and obviously I think he is gay, but and there is kind of a more tendency for that I think with the gay community than the straight community. But there are some people in the straight community that will engage in that kind of stuff, right?
You let me put makeup on you.
Yeah, I did, and I enjoyed it a little bit. I thought it was cute, But I feel like that's kind of one of the things that is ingrained into men, right? Where like, say you just want to get your nails done, or like get your nails painted just because you're curious what your fingernails are going to look like painted, and then you go out and you're with your guy friends and they all make fun of you for having your nails painted, right? That's definitely something that's masculine.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that's frowned upon in the masculine community. Or like when you painted my face, right? Well, not painted my face. What am I saying? When you did makeup on me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tim, my roommate, was laughing the whole time, taking pictures, saying this is hilarious, all this stuff, because in his eyes, right? And I'm not blaming him for this. I'm not saying that, he was wrong in any way, because it's just kind of our society. He was judging me because I was in a sense demasculating myself, and I'm putting that in quotation marks. Demasculating myself by doing that, by engaging in something that is seen as more feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of more so an issue. I think. I mean, obviously, the homosexual thing is an issue. I don't think that it's necessarily as much based off of masculinity and stuff than the actual expression and how they express themselves. Maybe they want to put on makeup or want to put on dresses or something like that. because that's just kind of how they are, I feel like that in itself is going to be seen as less masculine than them just being gay.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Hold on, there was a thing that I was thinking about. We're pretty much at the end of our questions here, but I had one more thing that I was thinking about. I can't remember what it was though. Shoot. We can just move on with it. It's all right. We're probably at like an hour or so now, I want to say. Hold on, let me just check what our timestamp is here. We are at an hour and 10 minutes, so I think we'll call it a quits there. That's pretty decent.
All right.
Decent length. But I will ask you this one last question, and just kind of wrapping it up back to the very first question I asked you. And after everything that we've talked about, right? Do you think that masculinity is toxic in our society?
Like the concept of masculinity?
Yeah.
No, but I feel like the things that go along with it could be.
Yeah.
Like associations with certain things.
Yeah.
Like not having to show your emotions. I think that is more considered toxic than just the concept of masculinity as a whole.
Yeah. I think that that's fair. I think that there are some things that, there's nothing wrong with being a masculine person. There's nothing wrong with being manly. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But I think that there is something wrong with saying that someone's expression, how they, express themselves, is wrong because they are not manly. I think that that's important. I think that we should change things around a little bit and maybe stop, seeing men who aren't as masculine as any less. And I will end it on that. Thanks for coming on, having this talk with me.
You're welcome.
And hopefully maybe it opened your eyes up, I guess, a little bit to some of the issues that maybe I face on a day-to-day basis, because obviously women have their own issues, right? But I think there is a stereotype out there that men don't really have, insecurities about themselves. Men don't really, have to worry about that kind of stuff, and I think that it does have to do with some of the fact that men hide their emotions and maybe they don't talk about it as much. But there is honestly some form of toxic masculinity out there, and we need to get rid of it. So thanks for listening. If you've listened to this whole thing, I appreciate it. Hopefully, maybe you can ask some of these questions to your friends. This is an interesting topic to talk about. So I implore you to maybe listen to this with a friend of yours, or listen to this with a loved one. And as you get through it, pause after every question, answer the question for yourself, and then continue listening, and see if maybe your opinion is similar to ours, or whatever. But have a good day or night, and thank you for tuning in. Hello and welcome. So this is a podcast style. I figured makes them toxic? Do you think that it instills like a certain way